This is Jim Clark from the World Technology Network. He did a huge event in London yesterday. Time, fortune, lots of really interesting people. So you are incredibly lucky that he could be bothered to come over here on a rainy London day to talk to you about technology in the future, but not from a boring, things are going to get faster, more complicated, but from a very interesting, different perspective. So please pay attention, and we expect lots of questions towards the end. He's not going to be talking for the full hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really glad I could be here today. Yesterday I spoke to people who are very well connected and know a lot and do a lot in their careers, but they're, like all people who've been doing things like that for a while, they're sort of fixed in their views, even if they don't think they are. So I actually enjoy, and I have much more hope, speaking to younger people, because you don't have as much to unlearn. The talk that I've been giving lately, and I'll tell you a little bit in a moment about my background, the talk that I've been giving lately is about our civilization. I believe that our current civilization is not only utterly unsustainable, but also, more importantly, morally indefensible. And I think that that has a lot of implications. And it has implications for your choices in the future. And hopefully we'll cover some of that ground, and we can be more specific when we go to questions. People often say that it's the best of times and the worst of times at any moment in history. I think we've become so used to that we've begun to think that it's the definition of the human condition. And I don't think it has to be that way. But because we've gotten used to that idea, we think that's just the way it is. I think we're at a very interesting moment in history right now where we have this incredible opportunity to not just have a new civilization, which I'll explain in a moment why I think it's going to happen anyway, but why we can actually make, for the first time, a better one. So, why do I think we're going to have a new civilization? I believe that we're going to have more change in our current civilization over the next 20 to 30 years. So, a key part of your careers, the next 20 or 30 years, than we've had in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years. That's how much things are changing, all at once. Like aging, it's very hard to see in the mirror when you look every day. But if you look at a photo a year later, you might catch a little bit. If you look at 3 or 4 years later, you see it more. 6, 7, you see it a lot. If you bump into an old friend, people change, but you can't tell when it's happening. So we're in one of those periods right now where you can talk about that kind of level of change, but we've become used to the change happening so quickly every year that we don't notice it. It's become normal. But it is that level of change. Some of this is somewhat different than the talk I gave yesterday, but I think it's more relevant for you. So I think what we're undergoing right now is I call it a phase change. It's bigger than a cultural revolution or a scientific revolution, a technological revolution, an economic revolution, or a political one. It's across the board. Phase change is what happens when you go, let's say, from liquid water to steam or liquid water to ice. It's the same thing, but it's totally different. And that's what we're all going to be living through in the next few decades. Why do I think this change is bigger than the ones in the past? I'll just pick a few examples. One of the basic assumptions that human civilization is built upon, and human society and self-identity is built upon, is the idea that you're stuck with the body that you're born with, and that you will never die, that you will die. So I think we're in a period right now where those assumptions are up for grabs. In terms of the body that you're born with, we're right now working on this, in the world right now, you're seeing scientific advances for organ replacement that are basically, it's not usually in the same body, but it's in different people, different organs are starting to add up. So if they did happen in one body, pretty much up to the brain, you could replace everything. The brain is the next and final stage, But that's being worked on as well. So when you think about that just in terms of medical terms, we probably, barring accidents, which is a big if, barring accidents in your life, barring major diseases over the next, let's say, 2 decades in your life, there's a relatively good chance that you will not die from disease. And maybe, in some sense, that your body may not have to die or may live for hundreds of years. This is all real stuff that's going on right now. The brain is the most complicated one, but even that is beginning to be cracked. We're starting to be able to view a memory being formed. We can even see where the letter A resides in your brain. So that every time you think a word with the A in it, or you say a word, or you write a word, that little part of your brain is activated. We can trace that now. And the implications of this, as you extend it out, is that we will be able to know exactly what's going on in the brain and make a copy of it. In effect, download the brain. Download our consciousness. So one way we can maybe live forever is we keep the meat body going. The other way, which is, I think, more interesting and has implications, again, for some of the work down the road that you guys are involved in your careers, is that our consciousness may not be bound to these bodies and may be able to have an experience of existence in the world and share experience with others that is unprecedented in history. It changes, again, that's why I say it changes everything compared to the last few thousand years. It's that big of a change. Another change is this idea that the alchemists had, medieval alchemists, which was that they could transmute materials, and sort of the idea of the old wizard, and they're mixing potions and so on and so forth. That was their holy grail, was to be able to change matter. So we're now in an era where the magic is actually real. The magicians are coming of age. With nanotechnology, with 3D printing. We even have a 3D printer last year that was being worked on that could print molecules. So think about the implication of that. The idea of being able to make anything, anywhere, at any time, out of anything. And think of how all of human economics, and the structure of society, and the history of different nations' trajectories has been based a large part on their raw materials, their access to raw materials at a distance or at home, the wars that were fought over them, the educational systems that need to be involved in the structure of massive enterprises that could process and manufacture things from those resources. Sometimes the magic's not just real; it's funny. So that's a change. That's a huge change in human history, and that's going to be happening during our lifetime. And we haven't even begun to think of the implications. And I'm possibly not in your class, but I think general in education is not taking this phase change into account very much at all. The best teachers are teaching on the cutting edge of what is happening, and the worst teachers are teaching the past that they know. But very few educational institutions are teaching the thing that I think they need to teach, which is flexibility in the face of our total, utter ignorance of how this is all going to play out. These changes are so big that it would be delusional for me to say that I know where they're going to lead. But they're that big. And so it's impossible to teach for them. What you can teach is flexibility. What you can teach is starting to think about these things, like inviting someone like me in. But there are not many people who even talk about the stuff that I'm talking about. Maybe 20 people that can go around and that have genuine exposure to the people working on these things. But that's frustrating to me, and it doesn't make any sense because of the scale of the change. Government should be aware of this, but they're not preparing for this. In individuals are not preparing for this, families are not preparing for this, educational institutions are not preparing for this level of change. The idea that you can plan for your future based...
I promise that will be the last one.
That's right. Based on a reasonably stable world is a false premise. If I was your age and I was planning my future right now, I would hear what I'm saying, and even if it made you uncomfortable, I would take it very, very seriously, which is that the idea that you have a vision in your head, and we all have that, it's natural, of where you'd like to be in 10 years and why you like this career path and what kind of places you might want to work, they're all up for grabs. They're not going to be around. The jobs that you think will be there will be other kinds of jobs, dramatically different. And younger people will have an easier time, younger than you in 10 years, learning how to take those jobs than you will, in all likelihood, because you'll have a lot to unlearn. Because you were truly on the cutting edge by being here right now compared to everyone else, but they will be more in touch with the changes than you are. That's the pace of the change. So the way to prepare right now is flexibility. Gaining as much knowledge as you can about the trends that are coming and being able to plant your feet in as many places as possible. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but that is the case. Now, the positive side of all that is the fact that this is an era of an unprecedented opportunity because everything is changing. And when everything changes, the old guard and establishment is most likely to be replaced. Historically, those are the periods where young people and iconoclasts and different thinkers and mavericks can rise most quickly and succeed and help create new forms of stability and new forms of civilization. So this is an incredibly exciting time, I think. But it's certainly not a time where I can honestly tell you in good conscience that whatever you've been planning, and I don't even have to know the details, whatever you've been planning for the next 10 years is not going to occur. I would make bets with money I don't have to each one of you about that. Every one of you will not be doing what you think in 10 years because of the scale of this change. One of the things that I have 2 daughters, and even though I'm divorced, which makes it more difficult to protect them all the time, the parental instinct is to protect yourself and your family sort of from the outside in. If you love someone, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, that you want to protect them, that unit, yourself and them, and out on out to your family, your community, your nation, and only then the larger civilization. But we have to start thinking as well from the outside in right now, even for yourself, for your own protection. Because the civilization is going to change everything in those inner circles. The currents of history right now, those tides are so strong that the idea of protecting, creating stability and security for yourself and the people you love is not as easily done as it could be in the past in a more stable period. You need to start thinking about how to change the civilization from the outside in so that you don't have to protect the people you love from a civilization that you can't control. You need to be part of that process. Do you have a choice? No. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. But the boat right now is being rocked for you. It's being rocked so extensively that you're going to be thrown out of the boat or you're going to jump out of the boat. It's better to jump out of the boat. Now that would be depressing if there were no alternatives. But as I said, this is a period of incredible opportunities. So I have a much longer, as Frodo notes, version of this talk but I thought it would be much more interesting to give you the bare bones and then ask questions and have a discussion amongst ourselves. Does that make sense?
You also have a very interesting history. Talk a little bit about your background maybe first.
I escaped a Turkish prison about 3 years ago.
No,
not that story? Okay.
I want to hear that.
Yeah,
story.
I want to hear that
Yeah,
one.
no,
That one was a good one.
Yeah.
So.
No, it'll be in the book. I went to Cambridge here, visiting from the U.S. While I was there, I would have had 2 more years, or I just got this entrepreneurial bug. I decided I had to start doing things. I couldn't wait any longer. So I went back to the U.S. and I started at age 21 a clearinghouse for paid professional jobs in the nonprofit sector. I figured that would be the way I could make the most difference, would be to help everyone get to the job they really wanted to do that made a difference. And if you added up hundreds of thousands of people doing that, that would make more difference than if I was the best at making a difference in one thing, even though it would get less attention. And so I did that. That organization ended up serving about 150,000 people a year. While I was doing that, I helped set up, there was a senior at Princeton who was 2 years younger than me, and she wrote as her thesis the idea for a national teachers corps, sort of like the Peace Corps, but for teaching 2 years in the toughest inner city schools in the U.S. So I became her mentor, 2 years older, and we set up this thing called Teach for America. I took a year off in 1992 when I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas in my early 20s to be one of the directors of Bill Clinton's first presidential campaign that turned out to be successful. And I was in a lot of roles, but one of the roles I had was I wrote the concept paper for AmeriCorps, which is a domestic Peace Corps national service program in the U.S. But I was also his liaison to the nonprofit sector, so that covered almost every issue. And gave me a lot of exposure to many things, which is part of why I think anyone could think the kinds of thoughts that I have if they try to expose themselves to many things, because then you literally get a perspective. You have to try to learn a bunch of things well, but it's still more interesting, I think, to have a broad perspective. Then in 1993, I had learned about this obscure scientific military network in the U.S. called the Internet, and I set up one of the first internet consulting companies in the world, and then began to partner with a tiny startup company that had 5,000 customers called AOL. And so my company grew with them, and I was able to use them as a platform to do things that hadn't been done before that are all second nature now, like online credit card donations to charities and online volunteering and nonprofit professional communities and issue-based communities. This is all normal now, but it had never been done before, and they allowed me to experiment as they grew from 5,000 to 50 million customers. Then in '97, I moved to London. My ex-wife was European, wanted to be over here, and I had friends from my days at Cambridge. So while I was here in my flat near Victoria, in my living room, I created the World Technology Network, which is a global association of the peer-elected most innovative people in the world in science and technology and related fields. So we have 20 different categories. We do the World Technology Awards every year with Time Magazine and Fortune and CNN and others. And the winners and finalists in all the award categories become the members. So we have about 1,000 fellows now in over 40 countries who are, in their opinion of their peers, the criteria is doing the innovative work of the greatest likely long-term significance. So when I set it up, the goal was to create a network of the people creating the 21st century. Because I'm convinced that the major driving force for a lot of these changes is not only, but it's mostly science and technology for our century. So that has succeeded, that network, and we work with the United Nations now. We work with a lot of people I just came back from 5 days at the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. I lead a very stimulating life in terms of who I get exposed to, and keeps these ideas fresh, and it gives me more raw material to interpret on behalf of other people. But I really try to live. I don't want to participate fully in the civilization, embed myself in a civilization that I consider morally indefensible. So I'm able to speak with these people. I have enough credibility from the things that they look for credibility for. But I go to Davos in the same year that I go to Burning Man. I really want to. I believe that what people think civilization is a static view that the media allows us to see, or that we have the time to look for. But what actually civilization is a dynamic ecosystem. It's constantly in flux. And this is, again, useful for what you're studying right now to think about. In a dynamic ecosystem, not just a gene, a mutation that might suddenly become useful. You know, an animal in Africa suddenly gets a slightly longer neck and is able to eat the leaves that are higher on the tree, and more of those survive, and then the ones that have a little bit longer necks than that survive even more, and suddenly you end up with a bizarre creature like a giraffe. But maybe at other times when the trees were shorter, it didn't matter, and so the ones born with the longer necks wouldn't be valuable. Same thing goes for memes with ideas. Civilization is a constant battle for conflicting ideas, and some of them catch on. You know, why in the Middle East in a few thousand years ago do some religions catch on and some don't? When everyone was throwing out relatively similar ideas. You know, well, Roman Empire decides, oh, we like that one, it's useful to us, and so we'll put our efforts into co-opting that one. That's how history works. Something can suddenly become adaptive that wasn't adaptive before. And that goes for what you're learning in communications and advertising. So we're living in a society right now where being aware of the constant flux is I think, one of the most important skills, because your competitors, individually and collectively, will not be doing that. They will be taking a snapshot of things and making their plans based on that. And you'll be, if you take the view of an ecosystem, you'll be a little less aggressive at times, but a lot more broad in your approach, and so you won't miss as much. And people will think that you're plugged in. The reason you're plugged in is because you really are plugged into a broader view. Never prejudge where significance will come from, and then all the serendipitous stuff happens. And people wonder, why are certain people more lucky? Why do certain people have more serendipitous encounters with people and ideas? Because those are the ones that don't have closed minds. And so they adapt and experience as much as they can. And then when an opportunity arises, suddenly they can grab onto that and apply it. And the narrow-minded experts may be good temporarily at one moment in time, but they very rarely repeat that success, because in a way it was sort of hit and miss when they did that. Anyway, that's some of my background, if that's helpful. Is there anything else you think I should add, or should we open it up?
Yeah, let's open it